She was young, bright, and full of dreams, working on a Disney cruise ship bound for paradise. One morning, she made a phone call that changed everything. A flicker of panic, a whispered, "I'm fine." And then, silence. No witnesses, no goodbye. Just one blurry CCTV clip, and a pair of shoes that weren't even hers. What really happened to Rebecca Coriam? And why has no one been held accountable? This isn't just a missing person case. It's a mystery that reaches into the depths of corporate silence, international law, and a family still waiting for the truth. She was born on March 11, 1987, in the quiet city of Chester, England. The kind of place where the rain knows your name and where every brick in every old building seems to hold a memory. Rebecca Coriam grew up in a loving family, parents, Mike and Ann brother Rachel, and a tightly woven circle of friends. She was thoughtful, sporty, endlessly warm. Her teachers said she had a gift for working with children. Her friends described her as fiercely loyal, deeply empathetic, and filled with a restless curiosity that never seemed to settle. Even as a child, Rebecca dreamed of things bigger than herself. She loved to travel. She loved to help. After finishing school, she studied sports science with a focus on child and youth development. She worked briefly at Camp America, nurturing children through activities and challenges far from home. That experience changed her. It showed her a life where kindness was currency, where emotional intelligence could be a vocation. It was this passion that led her to Disney Cruise Line. In June 2010, at just 23 years old, Rebecca Coriam was hired by Disney as a youth activities worker aboard the Disney Wonder. The job was prestigious, demanding, and competitive, a coveted post for someone her age. Her family was proud. It was the kind of opportunity that promised the best of everything travel career and the magic of Disney woven through it all. The Disney Wonder itself was more than a ship. It was a floating world, 13 decks high, 964 feet long, carrying up to 2,700 guests and over 900 crew members. Beneath the glamour and the showtime, life aboard was rigorous. Crew members lived in tight quarters, worked long shifts, and had limited privacy. But Rebecca didn't complain. In calls and emails home, she shared stories of the children she worked with, her colleagues, her excitement about seeing new places. Still, not everything was perfect. In the weeks leading up to her disappearance, Rebecca's communications hinted at tension. She mentioned that she was feeling down. One message suggested she might be struggling emotionally, though her family didn't sense anything alarming, at least not yet. They chalked it up to the intense, isolating atmosphere on board. She was scheduled to return home soon for a holiday in April. They were counting down the days. The Disney Wonder was on a routine itinerary that March, a week-long voyage departing from Los Angeles, headed for the warm coasts of Mexico, including Cabo San Lucas and Puerto Vallarta. The passengers were families escaping into a world of ocean sunsets and Disney characters. For most of them, it was a vacation they'd never forget. For Rebecca Coriam, it was the last journey she would ever make. On March 21st, the day before she vanished, Rebecca posted a cheerful Facebook update. "Hey Mom, hope you're okay." There was nothing unusual, no sign of what was about to happen. Her parents messaged her back, expecting a reply that never came. The next morning, she missed her shift. Colleagues noticed she hadn't returned to her cabin overnight. She wasn't in any of the usual crew areas. Her name was called over the ship's internal PA system. No response. She had simply disappeared sometime between 5:45 a.m. and 9:00 a.m., somewhere in the vastness of the Pacific Ocean. Disney's official version of events would later rely on a single piece of footage, the last known image of Rebecca Coriam. A grainy surveillance clip taken at 5:45 a.m., showing her in the crew lounge barefoot, wearing oversized men's clothes, pacing nervously, and speaking on a shipboard phone. Her expression is serious. She presses her hand to her face. A male colleague enters the frame, seemingly asking if she's okay. Rebecca nods, offers a brief, "Yeah, fine," then hangs up and walks away. She is never seen again. No one would report seeing her on deck. No one would report hearing a scream. And when the sun rose fully that day over the Pacific, Rebecca was gone, vanished into the space between certainty and silence. Her cabin was untouched, her belongings still there, passport, ID, even her beloved stuffed animal that she slept with. It looked as though she'd meant to return. The sea has always swallowed secrets. But the story of Rebecca Coriam would soon become more than just a tale of someone lost at sea. It would become a case study in jurisdictional gray zones, corporate opacity, and a family's unrelenting search for answers that may never come. It started with promise. It began with joy. But in the early hours of that March morning, something went terribly wrong aboard the Disney Wonder, and the world would spend the next decade asking, how can someone disappear from a ship full of people, and no one, not even the company that owns the ship, seems able to explain it. The morning of March 22nd, 2011 began like any other aboard the Disney Wonder Sunlight, rising over the Pacific waves, brushing quietly against the Hull families stirring for breakfast, and cast members preparing to deliver another day of onboard magic. But somewhere in the undercurrent of that calm morning, something was already unraveling. The ship was en route from Los Angeles to Puerto Vallarta, Mexico. Rebecca Coriam had not shown up for her 9 a.m. shift. When colleagues went to check her cabin, she wasn't there. Her bed looked unused, her shoes, clothes, passport all untouched. It was as if she had vanished from the air itself. But there was one clue, one image. At 5:45 a.m., a closed-circuit surveillance camera in the crew lounge recorded Rebecca. She's seen wearing what appears to be men's clothing, a large t-shirt and shorts, not her usual uniform, and not what she was known to wear in private either. Her appearance struck those who knew her as strange, uncharacteristic. Her hair was disheveled, her posture tense. She's on the phone using a crew landline. The conversation isn't recorded, but her body language speaks volumes. She's visibly distressed. At one point, she clutches her head with her hand. Her expression flickers between frustration, urgency, and quiet panic. A male colleague enters the shot, possibly asking if she's okay. Rebecca responds, "Yeah, fine," before ending the call. Then she turns and walks away out of frame. The timestamp reads 5:45 a.m. It is the last confirmed moment anyone ever sees her alive. By mid-morning, the crew initiates a missing person protocol, but only internally. The ship's operations don't come to a halt. There is no wide-scale announcement, no public search. According to Disney's later statements, the vessel was thoroughly searched from bow to stern, passenger cabins, staff quarters, storage rooms, maintenance decks. But no trace of Rebecca was found. Shortly after, her name was broadcast over the internal paging system. No reply. That afternoon, the Disney Wonder contacted the U.S. Coast Guard. By then, the ship was already deep into international waters. The Coast Guard, based in California, initiated a search pattern covering the sea along the ship's recent route. Mexican Navy vessels joined the effort. Helicopters scanned the waves. Nothing was found. Back in England, Rebecca's parents, Mike and Anne, were notified that their daughter was missing. The phone call came as a jolt, abrupt, vague, and terrifying. All they were told was that she hadn't shown up for work, that she couldn't be found on the ship, and that a search was underway. From their home in Chester, they tried to grasp what they were hearing. Rebecca, their lively, strong-willed daughter, had vanished, not from a street or a forest, but from a secured cruise ship in the middle of the ocean. They boarded a flight to Los Angeles immediately. In the meantime, Disney attempted to manage the optics. They informed the media of a missing crew member and framed the incident as tragic but unusual. Their statements suggested that Rebecca had likely fallen overboard, possibly due to a freak wave or accident, a theory that would be repeated many times in the weeks to come. But when her parents arrived at the port, things did not feel right. They were met by Disney representatives, not law enforcement. They were taken aboard the Wonder and shown the CCTV clip, just the one of Rebecca in the lounge at 5:45 a.m. No other footage, no additional timestamps, just that one moment, frozen in time. They were also shown a pair of flip-flops recovered from Deck 5 near the crew pool. The Disney team suggested they might have belonged to Rebecca, but her parents knew instantly they didn't. They were the wrong size, not her style. Too masculine, too worn. And inside, there was a name and cabin number. They belonged to someone else. Still, the flip-flops would become the cornerstone of the rough sea theory, the idea that Rebecca had been walking near the edge of the crew pool when a large wave struck and swept her overboard. But there were problems with this explanation. First, the weather that morning was calm. No storms, no reported rough seas. Second, the area near the crew pool was enclosed with high walls and railings. It would have been extremely difficult, if not impossible, for someone to simply be taken by a rogue wave without leaving any trace. No damage to the railings, no witnesses, no signs of a struggle. And most importantly, no other camera footage was ever shared with the family or the public. No confirmation of Rebecca walking the deck. No clip of her approaching the pool. Nothing that could connect her movements after 5:45 a.m. to any accident on the outer decks. Her family asked questions. Why hadn't the ship stopped immediately to conduct a coordinated search? Why wasn't a wider investigation launched before the vessel docked? Why weren't other crew members or passengers being interviewed? The answers were vague, delayed, or absent altogether. 3 days after Rebecca vanished, the ship docked in Los Angeles. By then, the Disney Wonder had resumed operations the show as always had gone on. Balloons, breakfast buffets, and character meet and greets carried on, while one of their own had disappeared. And when the time came for law enforcement to investigate, it wasn't the U.S. Coast Guard or the FBI. It was a single officer from the Royal Bahamas Police Force. Because the Disney Wonder was registered in the Bahamas, a common practice in the cruise industry known as flags of convenience, Bahamian jurisdiction applied. So one officer flew in, spent just 1 day aboard the ship, and then left. According to Rebecca's family, he conducted only a handful of interviews and spoke to no passengers. Whatever happened to Rebecca that morning was already being pulled beneath the surface, not just of the ocean, but of something deeper. A silence was setting in. In the hours and days that followed Rebecca Coriam's disappearance, the silence became more deafening than the news itself. The official position, as filtered through Disney, the Bahamian authorities and the media leaned toward an accidental fall. An unfortunate one-in-a-million event, they implied. A young woman troubled walking alone on deck, swept overboard by a rogue wave in the early dawn. But that narrative never sat right with Rebecca's family. They knew their daughter. Rebecca wasn't someone who wandered aimlessly. She wasn't reckless. She was methodical, disciplined, always accountable. Her love for working with children wasn't a mask, it was her calling. She had plans. She was excited to visit Disneyland with her mom after returning from sea. She was messaging friends about her homecoming. Nothing in her recent behavior pointed to someone withdrawing from life. And if it was an accident, where was the proof? The crew search, according to Disney, had been exhaustive, but there was no documentation, no formal logs released to the public, no time-stamped sweep reports. The only visible sign of official procedure came not from police, but from Disney's PR team. The investigation by the Royal Bahamas Police Force, just one officer 1 day aboard, produced no public report. The officer didn't speak to the Coriams during his visit. No passengers were interviewed. Only a handful of Rebecca's colleagues were questioned, and even then briefly. When the Coriam family requested more details, access to ship logs, to additional CCTV footage, to the findings of the Bahamian investigation, they were denied. Disney referred all inquiries to the Bahamas, and the Bahamas offered no response. It became clear very quickly no one was taking responsibility. The ship continued sailing. Passengers boarded and disembarked. New crew members rotated in. To the outside world, the show went on. But beneath that, a more disturbing reality lingered. A young woman had vanished aboard a billion-dollar vessel operated by one of the most powerful entertainment companies on Earth, and no one seemed willing to investigate thoroughly. The Coriam family, in their grief, began their own search. They reached out to journalists, lawyers, politicians. They returned to the U.S., walked the length of the port, tried to reconstruct timelines from scraps of detail. Rebecca's uncle John Jennings publicly called out the lack of urgency. "She was our daughter, our family," he said. And it's like she slipped through a crack in the system that was never meant to be looked into. They started collecting every official statement, every discrepancy, and the discrepancies were everywhere. For one, the timing. The last CCTV footage of Rebecca was at 5:45 a.m. She was due on shift at 9:00 a.m., but there's no documentation showing anyone saw her in between. Was there footage from other corridors, from the decks, the mess hall, her cabin hallway? Disney never said, and they never released it. Then there was the matter of the flip-flops. Found near the crew pool, they were initially implied to belong to Rebecca, but later confirmed to be someone else's, with that person's cabin number clearly written inside. Why had they been presented as possible evidence? Even the clothing Rebecca wore in the CCTV footage raised red flags. Baggy shorts and a large t-shirt, neither item matched her typical attire. Friends said she was particular about her appearance. So whose clothes were they, and why was she wearing them? The theories began to mount. Some said it was possible Rebecca had taken her own life, that she was emotionally distressed and perhaps no one had noticed. But her family rejected this theory. Her communications in the days leading up to her disappearance, though at times vague, showed no sign of suicidal ideation. She had plans. She was engaged with life. Others suggested she had been attacked, that something had happened between her and another crew member, possibly someone involved in the phone call, and that the incident had been covered up. There were even whispers of a love triangle, that she may have been romantically involved with someone on board and that tensions had escalated. But these were rumors, not confirmed facts. And her family, determined to stay within the realm of truth, avoided lending them too much weight. But perhaps the most chilling possibility was the simplest one, that she had witnessed something or experienced something and had been silenced. Whatever the truth was, the lack of transparency ensured it remained buried. Disney maintained their position. Rebecca was presumed to have gone overboard. The ship, they said, had done all it could. The company offered condolences, but little more. And behind their careful language was a fortress of legal protection, forged through jurisdictional complexity, corporate strategy, and the practice of registering ships in countries like the Bahamas, where oversight is minimal and accountability is blurred. The Disney Wonder was a ship registered under a flag of convenience. This allowed Disney to avoid U.S. maritime law, reduce taxes, and control liability. It also meant that when a crew member went missing, the legal responsibility fell not to U.S. agencies, but to a distant Caribbean police department with limited resources and no direct incentive to investigate thoroughly. The Coriam family soon realized they weren't just battling grief. They were battling a system, one that allowed a human being to vanish without a trace and called it an accident before the facts had even been gathered. One that treated a missing daughter not as a tragedy to be solved, but a PR risk to be managed. From the start, the clues surrounding Rebecca Coriam's disappearance didn't line up. They didn't point in one direction. They scattered like pieces from different puzzles, forced together to make a picture that didn't fit. The most frequently cited piece of evidence was the pair of flip-flops found near the crew pool on Deck 5. Disney officials presented them to her parents as if they might belong to Rebecca, but they didn't. Mike and Ann Coriam knew it the moment they saw them. The sandals were too big, pink and floral, not her size, not her style. Even more telling, they had a name and cabin number written inside. A man's name, a different crew member altogether. Why then were they shown as if they were Rebecca's? As if their presence on Deck 5 supported the idea that she had been near the railing and possibly swept overboard. Then there was the matter of the CCTV footage. Only one clip was ever released: Rebecca in the crew lounge at 5:45 a.m., pacing distressed, making a phone call. No audio, no follow-up footage of her exiting the area. No recordings from nearby decks or passageways. This despite the ship having over 1,000 security cameras. If she had walked to Deck 5 or anywhere else, why wasn't that captured? Even her clothing raised questions. She was wearing baggy men's shorts and an oversized t-shirt, not her work uniform, not her personal clothes. Where did those clothes come from? Who did they belong to? To Rebecca's family and growing supporters, the story Disney offered that she may have been overwhelmed, disoriented, and then accidentally fallen overboard seemed increasingly hollow. It didn't help that no physical evidence connected Rebecca to the edge of the ship. No railing damage, no belongings left behind, no eyewitness accounts. The idea of a rogue wave sweeping someone off a secure walled crew deck with no sign, no scream, no surveillance footage, and no sound heard by other crew strained belief. Journalist John Ronson, writing for The Guardian, was one of the few outsiders given access to the ship after the incident. He spoke to several crew members during a voyage that retraced the same route Rebecca had taken. Many were reluctant to talk. Some said they'd been warned not to speak about the case. But one man who claimed to have been close to Rebecca told Ronson that Disney knows exactly what happened to her. Another pointed out the exact spot on Deck 5 where the flip-flops had been found, just steps from a camera that, according to them, should have caught any movement in the area. If so, why hadn't that footage been released? Other rumors began to swirl, whispered stories of conflict, of Rebecca being upset over something personal, of an alleged love triangle. A suggestion that the phone call she made at 5:45 a.m. may have been emotionally charged, even confrontational. But these were unconfirmed, and Rebecca's family refused to base conclusions on gossip. What they wanted was evidence, facts, transparency. Instead, they were met with a corporate wall. When the Coriams pushed for access to the Bahamian police report, they were denied. When they asked for Disney's internal findings, they received vague reassurances. There was no formal inquest, no transcript of the investigation, no clear chain of accountability. The British Foreign Office offered limited assistance, acknowledging that under maritime law, the Bahamas held jurisdiction, despite the fact that Rebecca was a British citizen who vanished from a U.S.-owned ship just miles off the American coast, and still the unanswered details piled up. One report claimed that Rebecca's credit card had been used after her disappearance. The charge was never confirmed publicly, and Disney never commented. Her Facebook password, too, had been reportedly changed, though again the source of this information remains murky, passed along through press inquiries and family accounts, never officially confirmed. Each of these clues, standing alone, may seem inconclusive, but together paired with the lack of footage, the misleading sandal evidence, the uncharacteristic clothing, the absence of any solid investigative documentation, they created a dark space where the truth should have been. Rebecca's family kept asking if it wasn't an accident, then what happened? And if it was, why did it seem like no one wanted to prove it? What haunted them most wasn't just the disappearance, it was the vacuum left in its wake. A blank space, no timeline, no body, no follow-up, just a single frozen image on a monitor and a sense that something crucial had been erased. Behind the polished decks and smiling mascots of the Disney Wonder, something had gone wrong, and someone or some system was making sure that no one looked too closely. 3 days after Rebecca Coriam vanished, the Disney Wonder docked in Los Angeles, ready for its next voyage. The gangways reopened, guests boarded, crew assignments rotated. The disappearance of a young woman, a colleague, a daughter, a friend, was by all outward signs already fading into the ship's wake. The official investigation fell under the jurisdiction of the Royal Bahamas Police Force because the Disney Wonder was registered in Nassau. One officer was dispatched. He spent less than a day on board. He conducted a handful of interviews, mostly with senior crew. He spoke to no passengers. He didn't issue a formal report, at least not one that was ever made public. When Rebecca's parents asked to see his findings, they were told the case was closed. Disney's stance was consistent. Rebecca was presumed to have gone overboard. No foul play suspected. But the Coriam family and a growing network of supporters weren't convinced. They weren't just grieving, they were navigating a legal and political maze. At every turn, they were met with silence or deflection. Disney deferred to the Bahamas declined to share information. British authorities, while sympathetic, claimed limited reach. This wasn't a lack of compassion. It was a lack of accountability built into the cruise industry itself. Nearly every major cruise line registers its ships in countries like the Bahamas, Panama, or Liberia jurisdictions, with minimal regulation and even less enforcement. These flags of convenience allow corporations to reduce tax burdens, avoid labor protections, and when something goes wrong, limit exposure, even in life-or-death scenarios. Rebecca's case was one of the first high-profile instances to reveal the full extent of that loophole. Politicians began to take notice. In the UK, then Deputy Prime Minister John Prescott, a former seafarer himself, publicly questioned the investigation and criticized Disney's lack of transparency. MP Chris Matheson echoed the concerns, calling for legislative reform that would allow Britain to intervene more forcefully when one of its citizens disappears under foreign jurisdiction. In Parliament, Rebecca's name was raised repeatedly. Why had a British citizen vanished aboard a U.S.-operated ship just off the American coast, and yet no British or U.S. authorities were allowed to investigate? The questions were sharp, the answers were vague, and Disney, for its part, remained careful. Its public statements always included sympathy, expressions of sadness, a consistent acknowledgement that what happened was a tragedy. But behind those statements was a legal fortress. All interviews with Disney employees were conducted with corporate lawyers present. The company issued no retraction, no clarification, no expansion of its initial claims. They didn't have to. The law was on their side. In 2016, 5 years after the disappearance, the Coriam family reached a confidential settlement with Disney. The terms were not made public. There was no admission of wrongdoing, no findings presented, just a quiet resolution. To Rebecca's parents, it was never about money. It was about truth, and they were no closer to it than on the day they'd first stepped aboard the Disney Wonder. Other families began to come forward. The organization International Cruise Victims, founded by survivors and families of those lost at sea, took on the Coriam case as a rallying point. They argued that what happened to Rebecca wasn't an anomaly. It was part of a pattern: disappearances, assaults, and deaths aboard cruise ships, many of which remain unsolved, under-investigated, or quietly dismissed under the veil of foreign jurisdiction. In fact, between 2000 and 2019, over 300 people were reported missing from cruise ships globally. Some of these were later found, many were not, and of those, only a handful ever resulted in criminal investigations with formal charges. Cruise ships are miniature worlds, isolated, self-contained, and often beyond the reach of meaningful oversight. And when tragedy strikes, families are left not just with grief, but with the crushing realization that no one is truly responsible. Rebecca's case became a symbol of that vacuum. Her story was covered in The Guardian, BBC News, The Hollywood Reporter, and on international platforms. Each report added a detail, a quote, a theory. But none could change the central reality: a young woman had disappeared from a ship full of people, and no one, no agency, no company, no government could explain how or why. Mike and Ann Coriam remained composed in every interview. They were not dramatic. They didn't make wild accusations. They simply asked, "Show us what you found. Show us the footage. Show us the reports. Tell us what you know." No one did. One of the most haunting quotes came not from the family, but from a former crew member interviewed anonymously. "We were told not to speak about it, not to speculate, not to answer questions." Disney has a way of handling things quietly. Quietly. That word comes up again and again. The search was quiet. The investigation was quiet. The outcome, a settlement, no trial, no closure, was quiet. But for those left behind, silence is not peace. It is an open wound, dressed in legal language and corporate courtesy, but never allowed to heal. As the months passed, Rebecca Coriam's name faded from headlines, but never from her family's life. For Mike and Ann Coriam, the silence that followed their daughter's disappearance was louder than any answer they received. They had come looking for facts. What they found instead was a maze of silence, a brief investigation, no follow-up, no public report, and no access to the evidence. Every request for CCTV footage beyond the single clip was denied. No one could explain why Rebecca was wearing someone else's clothes, or why misleading evidence like the flip-flops was presented to them, or why the only investigation lasted less than 24 hours. Rumors swirled a changed Facebook password, a possible post-disappearance credit card charge, but nothing was confirmed, and no one followed up. By 2016, Disney reached a confidential settlement with the family. No findings were released, no wrongdoing admitted, just silence wrapped in legal terms. British lawmakers, including John Prescott and Chris Matheson, called for changes to international maritime law. Advocates pointed to Rebecca's case as a symbol of a system built to deflect responsibility. Hundreds have vanished from cruise ships in recent decades. Few cases have seen justice. Rebecca's story lingers not just because she vanished, but because no one could or would explain how. Her parents still ask the same question. How does a young woman disappear from a ship full of people, and no one sees a thing? The ocean keeps its secrets. It doesn't scream, doesn't confess. It simply absorbs and forgets. Rebecca Coriam was 24, bright, compassionate, full of purpose. She vanished not in the middle of a storm, but in the quiet hours of a calm morning, from a ship filled with people, cameras, and routines. And yet no one could say what happened. Her parents are left with fragments: a frozen video frame, a Facebook message, her untouched cabin. Each unanswered question became its own kind of loss. Why no wider search? Why so little evidence? Why so much silence? The system around her corporate legal jurisdictional closed its doors quietly. One officer, one day, one theory. Disney moved on. The Bahamas never disclosed their findings, and the Wonder still sails. But Rebecca's name endures. In every retelling, she reminds us, a person can disappear not just into the sea, but into systems built to forget them. And still her family waits, not just for closure, for truth.